So, World Book Day means a lot to all of us, I know, and many stories and books and authors that we enjoy and love is a time to celebrate and remember and reflect on what we're currently reading or what we've probably read in the past. And over my time, I've accumulated many favourites. I think the thing that got me into reading was poetry, interestingly enough, because when I was growing up in the 70s, when I was really young, there used to be a program that was a talent show, and it was called Opportunity Knocks. And I grew up in the Oxford area, and there was a lady called Pam Ayres that was also from Stamford in the Vale, which is a place in Oxfordshire. And she came onto Opportunity Knocks, and she performed her poetry, which was funny, it was comedic, and it was brilliant. And it inspired me to buy her book and really get into poetry itself. And I really did enjoy reading her stuff. But poetry and verse has really stuck with me through my life. It's something actually that I reflect on a lot, whether that's the words of a song from artists that I love, whether that's Nick Cave, David Bowie, U2, or many different rock bands and pop bands that are around in through my life, or even currently with new bands that I hear. And I tend to pick up on the lyric and the depth of the song and what the song's actually saying to me. And I see that as a form of poetry, which I know probably some of you would do the same too. So I do love verse and I do love poems. And I spent 28 years in the Manchester area. And there's a poet that's from Salford near Manchester called John Cooper Clarke. And he was known as the post-punk poet because he really did come on the scene in the late 70s and through the 80s period. And he's brilliant. Again, he's humorous. It really does have that northern style and language and life in the Northwest that you pick up through his verse and what he has to say. But I think he's brilliant and a poet laureate, in my opinion. So that's been something that's been really dear to me. And reading those books of poems have meant a lot, as well as just opening an album cover or reading the lyrics of a song. When it comes to novels and stories, there are many sort of famous authors that I reflect on and love, and there's been so many that I've read and enjoyed. But I can think of authors like Ian Banks, and I remember he was one of the first sort of novels that I really got into and loved the story. But he's quite macabre in his style. He does some really interesting books, like The Bridge, for example, is one that's a bit of a classic of his. But his first one was the book that really struck me. It is quite macabre, but it's called The Wasp Factory. And it was a book that, I just found as a real page turner. I found it really intriguing and thoroughly enjoyed it. I was also into travel a lot in my 20s and late teens, but in my 20s I was traveling a bit further afield and going to the Far East and places like that. And around that time, Alex Garland wrote his first novel, actually, which is called The Beach. They made a film of it, and that film was a popular film too, with Leonardo DiCaprio in. But I have to say the book is just so much better. It was brilliant. And as well as the story it has to tell related to travel and been in places like Thailand, means a lot to me. And I fortunately had the opportunity to go and spend quite a few great holidays and touring around the Far East as well. I'm from an Irish background, and my parents, used to like poetry too, actually, and books too. But there was one particular author that I really does chime with me and has a close place in my heart, and that's an author called Roddy Doyle. And he wrote many books around the early 90s period when he was really popular. And it stemmed from watching a film called The Commitments, which had a music angle, which drew me in. And it was about a guy in Dublin, growing up, who's based in Dublin around the Barrytown area, who tried to form a band and piece all the musicians together and about their journey in creating a band and performing, etc. But it is hilarious, and it is the Dublin humour I just love, as well as the Irish humour, but the Dublin humour in particular. And from those books, there was other books they wrote that became film too, such as The Snapper and The Van, and they're part of a trilogy that are very famous and popular. When I wanted to come into teaching, I had qualifications that would get me on to do my university degree, but I had to get a GCSE in English. And believe it or not, I didn't have it. I had a CSE from the 80s, but I needed to get the GCSE in English language. And around that time, I thought, well, the book that I'll read for my GCSE is going to be this one. And it's Roddy Doyle's book. And it's Paddy Clark, ha, ha, ha. And he got the Booker Prize for this one. And it's a great story. It's based in Dublin, about a young boy around 10 years old, Paddy himself, and it's about his time growing up in Dublin around that age when he was 10, but the mischief he got up to with his friends, what was going on in school, the teachers that he had, etc. But most importantly, about his family, his brother Sinbad, and also how life was in the area that he lived and what he did. It then actually turns a bit where his parents split up and how that impacted on him. But his vignette way of writing, Roddy Doyle, is something that I really like. It's quite quick and punchy, quite dialogue in its style. And that's where his wit and Dublin humour and sense of Dublin humour in his writing comes through. So that's a book that I'd recommend. But whatever you're reading, enjoy it.